Okay, there are two broad categories of migration. There's forced migration and there's voluntary migration. That's what this video is all about. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. And as is our custom, let's begin with a definition. Forced migration describes an occasion when people migrate against their will, usually because of extreme push factors. Like they don't want to move, but they have to. And perhaps the most significant example here is the African slave trade, which operated from the 16th to the 19th century and was responsible for the forced migration of something like 12.5 million Africans from their homes. Now, without getting too far into the weeds, this forced migration was the result of European efforts to build worldwide empires, which is what we call imperialism. And as they claimed territory in the Americas, it became clear that most of their money would be made through agriculture, and that created a huge demand for enslaved laborers from Africa, which had devastating moral and demographic results. Oh, and by the way, if you want notes to follow along with this video and all my videos, check the link in the description. But there are other events that create conditions for forced migration, things like natural disasters or ethnic persecution and the like. And even when people move in response to these events, they basically fall into one of two categories. Refugees are migrants who flee their home and cross national borders to find safety. Now, refugees are eligible for special protection under international law. The United Nations has certain standards for people to qualify as refugees. Like, for example, they have to have migrated to save their own lives or preserve their freedom if their own government is persecuting them. And if they meet those criteria, then they have the right to seek asylum or protection in the country to which they have migrated. However, if people are forced to migrate but remain within the borders of their home country, they're known as internally displaced persons. So both groups are responding to the same events, but refugees cross national boundaries and internally displaced persons moved within their home country. Okay, forced migration, I admit, is kind of a bummer. So let's look at the other flavor of movement, namely voluntary migration, which is a migration that is done according to a person's will. And there are no less than 7 kinds of voluntary migration you need to know, and here they are. First is transnational migration, which describes migrants who move but simultaneously retain strong ties to people at home. This can happen in a couple of ways. First, these migrants can keep in touch with friends and family left behind through communication technologies like phones or email, or by sending money home in the form of remittances. Second, transnational migrants may move back and forth between their destination country and their home country. Either way, these kinds of migrants basically live in 2 cultures at once. Second is transhumance migration, which refers to people who migrate because it's their way of life. I think of folks like pastoral nomads who migrate to different environments with their animals based on the season and the time of year. Now, to be fair, transhumance migration is not that common anymore, but there are still pockets of nomads who keep this ancient cultural tradition alive. The third is internal migration, which refers to people who migrate within the borders of a country. And here's where I introduce you to my boy Ernst Georg Ravenstein, who developed a series of laws to describe patterns of migration. And one of his laws stated that most migrations will occur over shorter distances because migrants encounter less obstacles. And for the most part, that observation correlates with migration data. And fourth is chain migration, which describes how one person's migration can lead to further migrations among their friends and family. For example, this guy migrates to another country because of various push and pull factors that he has experienced. Now, let's say he finds himself a job and settles down into a passable living situation, and all the while he remains in contact with those whom he left behind. Well, they're still experiencing the very same push factors that induced him to leave, but now they have an additional pull factor, namely that our guy has proven that a better life exists over here. Therefore, in a chain migration situation, these people will migrate to join him. And if you want to know why there are so many Irish Americans or Italian Americans, it's because of chain migration. And many of them were pushed out of their homes in the 19th century and found their way to America. And although they experienced some significant cultural persecution, eventually they found jobs and a better life, and that led to more and more people from their homes coming to join them. Fifth is step migration, which refers to migration that occurs in stages. So maybe a group of migrants plans to arrive at a particular destination, but because of intervening obstacles and opportunities, they may choose to settle in villages and cities along the way until they can leave for their ultimate destination. This has a way of reducing the risk and cost of completing long-distance migration all at once. Okay, sixth is migration by guest workers, which is a temporary form of migration in which people travel to a new country to work for a specified amount of time. For example, after World War II, Western Europe was rebuilding, and because of a sweet economic infusion of billions of dollars from the United States, they experienced an economic boom. But there was a problem. As it turns out, world wars tend to kill a lot of working-age people, and so in order to keep the economic growth, growing, several European countries created favorable conditions for guest workers to come and fill those jobs. And this ended up dramatically altering the demographic makeup of Europe. Like by 1980, 5% of the European population was made up of immigrants, and that's a lot. And seventh, we have rural to urban migration, which is exactly what it sounds like. People moving from rural areas to urban areas. And the majority of this kind of migration occurs because people are looking for work and can't find it in their sparsely populated rural homes. And so they go to big stanky cities in hopes of getting a job. While this pattern of migration has been occurring since the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s, most of the rural to urban migration occurring today is found in African and Asian countries. Okay, click here to keep reviewing my other Unit 2 topics, and click here to grab my video note guides, which are great if you don't like reading your textbook, but you still want to do well in your class. And I'll catch you on the flip-flop. Heimler out.